Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I've just finished reading a fascinating book as I've been getting into researching Aleister Crowley yet again, because again he pops up everywhere for some mysterious reason. I'm always amazed how people empower individuals that really are nobodies. They follow them, they give them money, and they have outrageous statements that who could possibly back people that talk like this, yet they always do. It's just frightening to the extent of wackos out there that people support, and then, of course, give them power in one way or another. It's really hard to believe. While apparently a lot of good people struggle and have little audiences, but these wackos have huge audiences and all they speak is really garbage. So it just amazes me. And here's another thing of the completely over empowering of Aleister Crowley, who basically was a nobody when he was alive. First of all, he died in 1947. He was a rich kid. Daddy made all his money selling beer, and they were a group of very radical. His parents were very radical born-again Christians, and he was left probably what would be considered, I don't know, $5-10 million today, maybe more. We're not sure. So this he was able to play. He went through a very typical upper-class British education, going, I think they call them public schools, that we call them private, another one of those language differences. And of course, was exposed to a lot there as well. These school systems where everybody is thrown together from, 5-year-olds to teenagers who are just ready to hump anything, really puts together a very difficult sexual problem there. Experimentation is very common, and if you're on top of each other, near each other, in rooms together, well, you've got some serious problems since there is no women around. Secondly, what's interesting is that homosexuality was illegal in the United Kingdom until 1969. Well, this is pretty shocking if you think about it, particularly a culture, and it was 1968 in Germany. These are kind of two same cultures that are known for their homosexuality. It's basically part of where their culture comes from. So it's very, very interesting when you look at all that. So you couldn't come out as a homosexual even if you wanted to. So there's a whole bunch of bisexual people, and you covered your tracks by having a particular wife if you were a male. I'm assuming a lot of females married guys. So the whole idea is they could cover it because this is very serious. They'll throw you in jail. This is not a joke. You could be thrown in jail 5, 10, 20 years for these things. And eventually, this even happened to the guy who broke the code in World War II of the German Enigma machine, who was then caught propositioning I guess it was a police officer posing as a homosexual. And they forced him to get either 20 years in prison. Oh, thank you for saving our people. Or you get liquidly castrated. And of course, soon after his treatment stopped, he was actually died. I mean, these things must be very hard on you when they're doing hormones. So it's very interesting. But, we can't separate Aleister Crowley from his environment and everything else. But the point is so... And I think there's a simple reason why he became popular. We'll get at that in a minute. But the author of this book is a very interesting person. Every time I read something or listen to people, I like to know, well, where are you coming from? What is your background? And I think it's very interesting to know William Ramsey has his own official website, William Ramsey Investigates, and he has these different shows on all sorts of areas of political intrigue, murder, Satanism, and of course his favorite subject, Christianity's look at that. He has other books as well. This was a fascinating read because it showed the different people who claim they were involved in Aleister Crowley and probably into a lot of other things. But let's get a little read here on William Ramsey. Attorney, author, researcher, William Ramsey is a graduate at University of California from Berkeley, one of the most radicalist universities on the planet, with a degree in history. Mr. Ramsey also has a JD. and is a member, that's a judicial doctorate, meaning ich bin lawyer, is a member of the state bar. So he passed the bar in California, and he was able to practice there. And he has an active license, I guess. He has written The Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11, A New World Order, Abomination, Devil Worship, The Deception in the West Memphis 3 Murders, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity, and Global Death Cult. That's exactly the book I'm reviewing now. So, The Order of Nine Angels, Adam Waffen, and The Slaughter of Innocents. Ramsey also has 5 documentaries that he produced. Occult Hollywood, Volume 1. I believe these are videos. I'm not sure where they're at, but Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11 and the New World Order, Smiley Face Killers. If a lot of this sounds familiar, well, we'll get where this all, who he's been working with. Who is abducting and Smiley Face Killers? Who is abducting and murdering young men in the U.S. and the U.K. And the slaughter continues as the Children of the Beast. Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity. William Ramsey worked as a producer for the Ed Opperman Report for 3 years. So now we know where Ed Opperman really falls into. But you can pretty much listen to him and find out. And, of course, all these people are not interested in the facts. They want to have things come out there. The minute you contact them with factual information that contradicts their belief system, they run and they put on stooges and goose. William Ramsey is a Christian, and he considers his books, films, and broadcasts together as a Christian ministry with the intent to expose evil and conformist with what Paul wrote in Galatians, whatever, 5:11, and have no fellowship with the unfaithful works of darkness, but rather expose them. The works are to inform and edify, as well as expose darkness in the present time. He lives in Lahanies. So this is where it's coming. This person, as anybody he works with, this guy is a radical Christian. I went and listened to some of his shows, and like all these shows, they're kind of interesting. If you listen to them with the proper ears and you're educated, you can find some interesting details. Of course, we think there are some interesting details. We just don't know. We don't know what the real story is, how much of this is truth, how much is hearsay or not. So we just don't know. He is an attorney. He knows who's going to sue him or not. He knows how to protect himself. So is all the information he gets all that credible? I don't know. What is credible information? Who do you get it from? I talked to the guy. He told me what was happening. So what does that mean? Somebody tells you what's going on and what they're saying is the truth? I knew a guy who worked there. Oh, that's right. That's a good... He worked in there, so he kind of knows. He does know what's going on. Because the people I ever worked with, they knew nothing about the company or anything else or what they were doing. They knew their little job and basically just were waiting for break times, lunch, and to go home. So I don't know really what that means. Certainly all this information that is put out there is interesting. So it gives you some different. And this is a very informative book. As I said, I'm not sure how much of it we can actually... is actual fact. So, like with everything, as I said, what is information? Where does it come from? He is looking for all the negative, rotten stuff he can find because that's where he's coming from. He wants to reaffirm his position. He's not looking for truth. He is looking for to verify his ministry, which is dedicated to born-again Christian radical belief systems. So this is where he's coming from. You got to understand. That's why I always look up things. Well, who is this person? For someone like this writing a book about an occultist, well, you have to understand that everything negative that he can find, he's going to publish. And anything positive, at the very least, he's going to look over. As I said, in general, I find from people is that nobody is seeking truth. They're seeking to reaffirm their belief system they have, whether that's right or wrong. And I've caught these people in horrible, horrible errors, stating something is a satanic symbol. They attack people which have basically nothing more than reputations that were created by frauds against them. People like the Process Church, Charles Manson, all these people that you have a particular conditioned viewpoint on is what these people pick up. So they don't look into the details of it. They look into what they want. So if they believe something is bad, they're doing. And this guy is all about, his opening in his book. There's this whole paragraph from the Bible stating about the horribleness of witchcraft and everything else. And I don't think he has that in his quote, but I thought part of that statement there was that witches and everything else should be murdered, whatever that means. That means anybody that doesn't believe with you. Of course, the Jews are witches, the Muslims are witches, the Buddhists are witches. This is the kind of stuff that goes on. And they made sure they horribly tortured and murdered people. The Inquisitions were really all set up to grab people's lands. And of course, to get rid of people who were healers and who had different points of view. So we all know, and the cover-up of Christian crimes, one of Robert Blanchard, the finest occult translator in the history of the planet, did translate from a book on the church crimes. It's called The Satanic Orgy. And the Satanic Orgy documented all of the crimes committed by the church which continue to go on. Churches that align to this day with Nazis, and the actual Pope today was a person who turned in tens of thousands of his own priests to the Argentinian Gestapo, who murdered them. 30,000 people disappeared in Argentina. He helped. And God knows what else he's into. The previous post was in a Nazi, 100% was in the Hitler Youth. This is the kind of background we get with these Christians. And, them Catholics, they aren't part of us. Oh, yes, well, let's forget about the blood-drinking, flesh-eating Catholics. Let's go to the Baptists. You have your blood-drinking session today on Sunday. So this is what you get into. And I find that all clergy are some of the most disgustingly corrupt people there are. Not to mention the Christians. So it's like everything else. They're human beings, and they wrap themselves around the Christian flag. And what's still wrapped in that is a turd's a turd, no matter what you wrap it in. So he's got a very anti-statement on anything but Christianity. Now, the problem with that is that everything you read and report is going to have a very negative viewpoint to it. Now, if you have something positive, well, what are you going to do? You're going to skip over it and just not mention it. So that means you're a really bad researcher, because you have already, you're prejudged is what prejudice means. So you've prejudged everything. And this stuff about the impotency of Christianity in most religions, and they want to blame this rich kid loser who never sold any books while he was alive, didn't do much of anything. Is quite interesting. So, this is what they do to try and show this is something. But this is a book that's very interesting, because throughout it, there's some very shocking information here in terms of if this stuff is true. And I'm assuming this was gotten from somewhere. But what it is a book proving occult power. So, like so many of these people that want to criticize it. But on the other hand, people don't even carefully read. They're so prejudiced that they want to grab outrageous news on this person instead of looking at their life. Aleister Crowley was a failure. He didn't make any money. He couldn't sell his books. He used up most of his money that he inherited by the time he died. And while he wasn't living in necessarily poverty, he certainly wasn't living as a rich man. But the point is he was old and feeble by then as well. Now, he had some following, but all these followers that he had, of course, never have any money, and he never got any of it. And of course, he never gave any money out. But because of his money in this particular time, when you're talking about people traveling around, 1910, 1920, all these different areas, this was a time when everything was very cheap. And if you had British pounds, you could buy anything and live anywhere. The fact that he also liked to get into personal debauchery is certainly not surprising. Don't all rich do this? And to blame him for doing evil deeds when the super rich allow you, your family, your society to die in the street? They refuse to give you medical care for you to take care of your children and bring them to hospitals? Oh, was that started by Aleister Crowley? Did he do all that? If you really want to find the demons and the devils, you should look in your own churches and the government and in the military and police departments. This is where the devils are. And the fact is that if someone is even a Satanist and somehow went through his career and killed people, the number of this is tiny compared to the mutual destruction that we allow the real evil people to do within our governments and from the pulpits. What has the church ever done? 2,000 years of nothing. So, it's really amusing when you get involved in all it. But, I don't want to confuse any of them people out there with facts. And, of course, let's remember Jim Bakker stole millions of dollars from his people, and the racist attitudes of so many of these Christians, and the Mormons who believe that anybody of color was cursed. We go on and on of these things, and, of course, believe in funny underwear and gold tablets. These are the things that go on, and all the silliness that we want to look at all this stuff. And from one religious practice to another, and to believe in comic book religions with people that are not born through intercourse. And of course, they rise from the dead. All this stuff is ridiculous. So, if you want to take some sort of philosophy out of these things, well, there's some mediocre junk there that all religions talk about, not to mention that every single story in every religious text is taken from older texts that are usually thousands and thousands of years older. So all of this doesn't make any sense. There's no proof there ever was a Jesus. There never will be. That is just a fantasy invented by the Romans and ultimately caused their own demise. But certainly no religions, and I don't want to pick on Christianity alone, have done absolutely nothing. 4,000 years of Judaism? What? 4,000 years of Buddhism? What? 2,000 years of Christianity? What? 1,500 years of Islam? What has it done? Now, we all know that Muhammad married a 6-year-old child and then consummated at 8. So the man was a pedophile and thought it was perfectly fine to have sex slaves and murder everybody who didn't really agree with him, even other Muslims, because they weren't the good ones. So this is what it gives you. Now, as long as people allow themselves. Now, people in general are not all on the same team, even though they claim to be, because in the end, you're going to do what you have to do because your government will enforce it. So your caliph will tell you what to do, and whether you like it or not, you do it, or you're murdered, or you are cast out of society. Same thing everywhere else. If you, when the times of the draft, if you decided to not go in the draft, you were thrown in prison. You didn't have a choice. So that's the way it goes. And of course, nobody is innocent anywhere. I still can't find a single group race of people who are good. Every one of the people have been murdering scum. But the point is, if you're not murdering scum, or you aren't a warrior society, you're not going to survive. Maybe a hold of the Mongols, Attila the Hun, all of the people that have come after people, Genghis Khan, all these people invaded and took over most of the world. So you're supposed to preach peace? It's impossible. So this is the way it goes, and that's why. And of course, we're in the same kind of society today. If you want to believe everything, we are. People want to take your stuff. They want to dominate you. They want to make you slaves so they can sit around and do nothing. That's the world. But certainly the Christians have done nothing against this. Every Christian I've known has really been the bottom of the barrel. So the whole idea is we have to understand that this is where these people come from. But, this is a very fascinating book because he talks about... Now, Aleister Crowley, as I said, did nothing. If you looked at his life, most of the things he tried to achieve, including many lawsuits, he lost. He had 6 or 7 very important lawsuits. Only one of them did he win. So it really doesn't show much power, nor was he able to control other people or anything else. Basically, it's a decadent lifestyle. We also do know that Aleister Crowley apparently did participate in rituals that he said he detested. Then why did you do them, Alley baby? Where he was actually sacrificing cats, apparently daily or whatever. This is the kind of stuff that he rationalized. And then, of course, in very typical Crowley way, said he didn't like it. Well, what do you mean you didn't like it? You did it anyway. Nobody put a gun to your head. So the whole idea is that he basically did nothing. He produced this whole thelema, which is particularly his belief system, which is pretty boring and everything else. He thrown this together, and of course he got all this information like everybody does from some whisper in his ear. Some spirit appeared to him and told him this kind of stuff. He's been blamed for a lot of things, and of course what he said was another one of those showman type things. He got attention and got in the newspapers by saying what? That he was the wickedest man in the world. Well, can you turn that down as a story? So that's going to get you publicity. And so many people do this, and it's misunderstood that this is how these people work. So he also was attacked by a fellow magician that he got into an argument with, Gregor McGather, whatever it is. And he sent over there and controlled his maid to almost kill him. He caused other things to happen within his house. Oh, you're very powerful, Aleister, aren't you? So, there was some talk, of course, because McGregor died in the Spanish flu, that he had something. But that's very unlikely. The guy died of the Spanish flu. You can't really give him credit for any of that. But the point is that he seemed to have been put upon by most people. He couldn't win lawsuits. He had lots of enemies. He certainly wasn't able to manipulate himself in the Golden Dawn. Nobody liked him. He was a spoiled little upper-class British brat. And he never wanted to put any money out there. Like all rich people, he took and took and took. Now, he published a bunch of pornography, many of it gay, all of it very illegal, and poems and other things. This was written pornography. That didn't sell. He took every little job he could get, even working for a fascist German organization, writing for them, which he has stated he considers was kind of a joke, him being British. But he went in there and smiley-faced everybody and got this job and got paid for it. He never really started any successful organizations. They keep mentioning Aleister Crowley and the OTO, which was a German organization that he took over and then radically changed, putting in his sexual preferences, which was basically when you reach the highest level, that's the homosexual one. So I don't know how anybody deals with that within the OTO, but I mean, that's part of the OTO. Now, I'm assuming a lot of people don't go up to the highest level of their sexual magic, different things there. But you start off with masturbation, you go into heterosexual. But what if you're gay? Should you be doing heterosexual magic? So, everybody gets forced here. And if you're not gay, why are you doing gay magic? But he was bisexual, so he didn't care, and apparently that's what he wanted to develop there. So we need to understand. So they give him all this credit, and that he's involved with intelligence. Well, everybody was involved. We had a world war going on in World War II. Secondly, he had many connections in Germany. The OTO is from Germany, and that's why it's so goofy. And the guy running that, I guess, was getting old and stupid and wanted to find somebody that could take it over and keep it going, and that had money. And that was Aleister Crowley. And he wasn't doing anything. He had nothing else to do. So they brought him in to do it. I don't know what happened there. They probably expected him to pay, but I'm sure they paid him. And they brought him in because he had the name. So it took this goofy little organization and made it what it is today, something that is still popular. So it is very, very interesting when you look at all these things. But talk about a person of nothing but reputation and nothing to back it up. Well, that's Aleister Crowley. He did nothing, and he wrote these books. Now, one of the reasons why his books are popular is, got to remember, in 1947, he died. And pretty much everything died with him. He didn't leave much behind him. He did have some books published, but nobody would publish his books that were regular houses. So he published his own books. So none of this was done, but this was something that started to, that was out there. And apparently there was enough of it, particularly in England, where if you were a person studying occultism in general, that you'd run into that. So he was well known, a very small community, along with Gerald Gardner, who started Wicca, and Alexander, who started Alexandrian a Wicca, which was basically witchcraft. And, they all have their kink elements to it, and I think that's part of their appeal. Original Wicca was very sexual. The Grand Rite was something where everybody had sex with the priestess. Oh, well, this kind of attracts people. And there were all sorts of other things there, lots of bondage and whipping, very typical, as the British are into a lot of that stuff. Gardner had that in there. And, of course, Alexandrian or witchcraft, which was a type of Wicca, of course, that was all nude as well. So everything was new. And of course, remember, this was the late 50s into the 60s when everybody was stoned out of their gourd and humping everywhere they could. So this is what was out there. There wasn't really much of anything out there. In the 1980s, when I started my organization as a group of people doing research, it was very difficult to get any information out there. It was only during the 60s where there was an explosion of printed books. Before that, there was a few odd books here and there. Gardner's book and Crowley's book. There wasn't a lot of books on witchcraft everywhere or magic in general. So if you wanted to learn that, and of course the Golden Dawn was a system that was private. They didn't publish any of their books or training as far as I know. Aleister Crowley did, and he took the Golden Dawn system and put it in a book. So if you're looking how to do ritual magic, you would generally gravitate to that. Now, there's always been a lot of grimoires out there, but most of them were very confusing, poorly put together, and not even translated. I was the first one to translate all the major grimoires, which are old magical how-to texts. Varying degrees of strangeness. But the point is that, and you couldn't get information. And this you're talking about in the 1980s and even to the 90s, that it was difficult to get information, it was difficult to get training. You couldn't just go any place and get many different courses until I offered them in the middle to late 80s as I started the nonprofit, brought it public, and then started allowing people to access. So there wasn't that much out there. It was difficult to get. Publishers that are now doing things like Llewellyn and other things, well, they were known for their astrological books, and that's how they made their living. This expanded into all sorts of occultism as it got more and more popular. And there were other publishers as well. Simon Wiesner was always a publisher of all time. But again, these were bookstores and other people that turned into publishers, and they were publishing books because they were so difficult to get. So it's very hard to get this, and you had to then mail off to people, get correspondence courses, internationally. And it was difficult to get anything from Europe at that time. I contacted many people and got very little response from them. I even got one letter for some, I don't remember their name, where they said, we have no interest in contacting any Americans whatsoever. So the whole idea is that's the cheery little thing you get. So the whole idea is we've got to understand that. So what happens is that, of course, the people who are the tune in, turn on, drop out group of people, all the 60s people, well, they were looking for radical information. I mean, how much of Marx and Lenin could you read before you vomit? I mean, good information. Where are you going to go with that? There's nothing new about that. And of course, when you're looking in terms of alternative religious stuff, well, paganism has always been very little written about. I mean, you can't hardly find a Druidic organization in England, particularly back then. Now there's a few, but it's still not something that, they're everywhere. You can't find books on Druidism or anything else, or any other of the Celtic and Nordic practices there. All that was pretty much not much around. What was around? Aleister Crowley's books were around. And for whatever reason or other, I don't know if people were publishing or what, but you could get his books. Not only that, he set up what is not a magical book, but basically an alternative religion. So nobody was interested in the regular religions. People were looking into Eastern mysticism. There's a lot of that going on. The yogic, the Indian lifestyle, the Rajimajis, as I call them, the Yogi-Mogis. All of these things are very popular. And of course, people were going to them. The Beatles went to India and stayed with one of them. They learned transcendental meditation and everything. Wasn't it George from the Beatles? That was a Hare Krishna and for all his life, and put up a temple. So there's a lot of that going on. And it's amazing how that's overlooked as well. They just want to say, well, because they read Aleister Crowley, they were into that as well. So his books getting around are not surprising, particularly in a time that there wasn't much else. So once they started publicizing that, and the Beatles put Aleister Crowley's picture on their Sgt. Pepper album, well, this became part of that. And people even today, surprisingly so, I think when they took a survey in England, that Aleister Crowley is considered the 43rd most influential person in England. Influential with what? But the whole idea is that people rejected regular religion so that they could actually work with this. This was the alternative because he was a bad boy and he called himself the Beast. Well, this was something to thumb in the face of the religious officials. It wasn't the fact that you were just going to a different religion. You're going against, which basically is kind of a squeaky clean embracing of Satanism in its own way, even though Aleister Crowley was not a Satanist. He was an evil magician, which kind of blends into that. But I won't get it. He didn't worship Satan. He had his own little belief system. And again, people misinterpret what he said. Do it thou will. And there's a whole sentence after that, under the love of the law, all sorts of things. So there's a whole paragraph there. And people only take that, meaning this is some egotistical statement that a Satanist would make, when it isn't that. Just like what Nietzsche and the Uberman. Nietzsche said basically the same thing. Probably Crowley stole it from him. So do what thy will means don't do what society tells you. Follow your own path. And this path should be something that empowers you. But if you're going to follow along with everybody else, you're going to just be part of the bad system. Now, Nietzsche said the same thing, that you should go for higher paths. Don't do what everybody else does. Don't believe in that. Go the higher path. Be a person who wants to do something in life. So this is all misunderstood. And of course, Nietzsche, who died way before the Nazis took over, is totally and completely misinterpreted. And he even changed most of his belief systems before his death. Aleister Crowley is the same way. So the whole idea was to go to your higher self. Don't do what society does. Don't go to church on Sunday and become a blood-drinking, flesh-eating Christian. Do exactly what you feel is your path in life. So this is completely misunderstood. The same thing with the Process Church, who seemed to be, they weren't satanic at all. They believed in the higher and lower nature of man. Now, they played some games for a few years in their original beginning, and they got labeled as this weird group. And of course, they had some weird but what are you going to do? How do you get attention? So ultimately, they turned into one of the best animal sanctuaries on the planet. So all of this needs to be fully understood of what's going on here. So, they actually, by writing a book like that, gives people a lot of power. And this is very typical of these kind of born-again Christians. It's odd with this guy because going to Berkeley, the most radical left-wing school, being a right-wing Christian must be an odd experience. I don't know what happened there, but this traces back to this guy who was a producer for Ed Opperman. Ed Opperman became a born-again Christian, and now we know why. It's because of this guy. And apparently he's on his own now for whatever reason that goes with. But it's a very interesting book of seeing how, first of all, showing power of occult practices and how dangerous and awesome it really is. There's a fantastic story here of David Bowie. Now, I did a little research on David Bowie, and it's interesting. And of course, like all of these people in later life, he said that he wasn't involved in magic hardly at all, but he certainly was in Los Angeles and had some pretty amazing things going on there, including some entity that took over his pool. And when he exorcised it, a giant black mark was created in the pool, which couldn't be removed no matter what they did. Interesting. And it shows how much he was into different things as well. And David Bowie's big into it. He had a big time, not Crowleyite, but an actual witch that was there. And I believe she was some negative witch that was staying there. She committed suicide. And there's a whole story on her as well. Very interesting of what he was into. And so many other people that I never heard of. But this book also gets off course and talks about satanic murderers, people who killed people. But what does that have to do with Aleister Crowley? And what he's trying to say is tying Crowley into all evil acts, etc., which is just misinformation. Aleister Crowley he did some negative practices like politicians were, all your great military men, all you guys who are killing and murdering people, and of course your business executives who won't provide medical policies so that your children can be taken care of. So when they get sick, they die. There's nothing wrong with that. And they all go to church on Sunday. They all do, So if there's any problem, it's the fact of the lack of credibility that any of the major religions has, because everybody is part of that and they are doing nothing. But there is some very interesting stories that I never heard of, like the famous researcher Alfred Kinsey. Now, I'm assuming this stuff is right. I don't know. I don't know how much of this is assumed or not. But, he's famous for his writing sexual behavior in the human male and sexual behavior in the human female. And he was the person, and this was in 1948 and 1953. This is a pretty long time back there. So he was particularly and was person who kind of broke open sexuality. Nobody talked about anything. It's still pretty hidden today. People have so many sexual hang-ups it isn't even funny. And of course, this isn't helping anything. But it says here that the Rockefeller Foundation and Indiana University provided him with $500,000 annually for decades. Well, that's an awful lot of money, particularly in the 1950s. It'd be 5 or 10 million. So I don't know. Bisexual Kinsey adventured to mainly dark recesses of American life to record personal sexual histories. Never formally trained in human sexuality, Kinsey himself proffered. Getting back to that, he had all this support, and he pretty much told the public, they're saying here, that he pushed himself on as being a sexual expert, which he really wasn't. In terms of train, he was never formally trained. Apparently, he was interested in Aleister Crowley and seeking to purchase for his library a prized item, the diaries of Aleister Crowley, because a lot of this stuff was difficult to get because he never sold it. Kinsey wrote that Crowley was a drug addict. The doses he took of heroin, cocaine are unbelievable, and the same is true of all of the sex he had. Now, I'm not entirely sure that's or not. Now, I've heard from Crowley that Crowley was an asthmatic, and he was. And they didn't have asthma inhalers then. So doctors recommended that you took heroin to keep your body loose. And that's the reason why he got on heroin, was because it was prescribed to him by his doctor. Here we go, different side. How much sex he actually had, I have no idea. But he used a lot of prostitutes, so it wasn't like he had this magnetism. Everybody wanted to sleep with him. Aleister Crowley used to hire prostitutes. Quick, easy, and I'm assuming cheap back then. And he was known for his imbibing of the mixture of male semen and female fluids. This is what he was into and thought this was an elixir of life. And the way he got this was through prostitutes, and what, at least that's what he states, Crowley, whatever that means. Apparently, Kinsey did travel to the Abbey of Thelema in Sicily, and of course was a follower of Kenneth Anger. You know, the usual culprits come out here, which people claim that they are friends of. And he claims that Kinsey's goals were the goals of Aleister Crowley's sexual values. Not sure what that means. The fact of having all this promiscuous sex, I guess. And of course, she's had a lot of critics, and of course, coming from people that want to keep sexuality hidden and in the perverse, sick way that most Christians do. And of course, there was, he quotes Judas Reisman, who has accused Kinsey of his illegal sexual experimentation on children, his history of deception and other endeavors, and his predetermined bias and selection of like-minded co-researchers in unethical and deceptive omission of data injurious to his own study. So she's saying that he was a very bad researcher, or should I say that's a common researcher? People are a little foolish if they think someone's seeking truth. Supposedly, Kinsey died of orchitis in 1956. This is marked by pain and swelling of the genitals, usually caused by gonorrhea, syphilis, and or tuberculosis. The condition usually follows some kind of trauma, which Kinsey regularly inflicted on himself by compulsive genital self-mutilation and other sadomasochistic behaviors. From a young age, Kinsey inserted objects into his urethra, drinking straws, pipe cleaners, etc. His sexual revolution faced a potentially serious setback when it's widely known that the theoretical father of the moon had died from advanced stages of sadomasochistic autoeroticy, masturbation activities. Apparently, Kinsey frequently tied ropes around his genitals and threw the other rope around a ceiling beam and pulled on the rope, tearing his organs. As for Kinsey's own quest for personal liberation, it ended in pain and squalor. He developed a massive pelvic infection as a result of his practices, almost certainly hastening his death at 62. It also says here, and this is hard to believe, that he circumcised himself with a pocket knife without anesthesia. Ooh. Hard to believe that's true, but I'm not even sure why you would do that. He apparently had lots of money, lots of funding. He couldn't go to a doctor. Certainly, later in life, actual circumcisions are not unusual. It's done for cleanliness and everything else. So I don't quite understand that. So they're saying here that that Kinsey, all of his research was really bad and prejudiced and everything else, and that's because he was infected by Aleister Crowley. It's unfortunate he was a little older. It would have been Aleister Crowley, the Process Church, and of course, Michael Aquino. Other people, and it goes into a lot of paths, so it's very interesting here to read their stories. Now, that's a bunch of stuff on Kinsey I've never heard before, and I'm assuming that information is relatively true. Of course, you can say what you want about dead people, and they can't see you, from what I understand. I guess the estate could, but he goes into, a lot of people we've heard of, but we don't really know their story, and they're linked to Crowley and Satanism, and we don't. So that's what's kind of nice about this book, but you have to take it with, one eye shut, because you have to be careful how this has been twisted. Is it true? So one of them is, of course, we've heard of Jack Parsons, who started JPL, worked with L. Ron Hubbard, and apparently was involved in OTO group in California, which he was, and so many other people were. There were many Hollywood actors and everything else involved with the OTO Lodge in Los Angeles, which is quite interesting. And of course, he was semi-connected. They say here he was a lot more than actually he was. So we just don't know. But it goes into Jack Parsons, and we can't go over this. I've already spent too much time here. Which has got some very fascinating stories. As I said, we've also got Kenneth Anger here. We've got, who else was there? People, Dennis Wheatley, Kenneth Grant, Gerald Gardner, which he claims got most of his information from Aleister Crowley. There's a whole J.K. Rowling. He, of course, goes after her because she wrote books on, really kiddie books. Of course, as we know, the Harry Potter books. So she goes after her and makes her look bad. I mentioned David Bowie. Very interesting story there. Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, Charles Manson, Alan Moore, Ozzy Osbourne. So, it goes on and on. The Doors, H.R. Geiger, which the Alien movie, it was based on his images. And this is, very interesting that these people seem to. What this is basically is a list of wealthy, successful people. And every one of them. Ian Fleming. So, we can go through here. Arthur C. Clarke. So really, John Carradine. Is David Carradine's father, who's very successful. So everybody in here is a very successful person who used magic to empower themselves in life to get more success. So it's very interesting. And we've heard of some of these people before in terms of their successes. And we've heard that some of them were involved in occult practices. And, of course, this book outlines it. Marilyn Manson, And of course, everything here is caused by Aleister Crowley and how he affected the world with his kind of goofy books that really don't say anything. It's an alternative religion, Thelema, and it's as simple as that. So nobody really gives credit to these common religions now. Hardly anybody is following them anywhere in the world except this radical born-again Christian movement that you tend to find in the United States. And of course, this is one of the worst shitholes in the world is the United States. And a lot of that's because of the uncaring, selfish, and evil Christians who won't give people housing, won't give them medical, won't give them food stamps, won't help people because, Jesus wanted people to live on the street and children to die of diseases and people to die young because they couldn't get medical care because they didn't have the money. So, after all, Peter was a tax collector, one of his disciples. So the whole idea is that we need to fully understand what's going on. But this is a fun book. It is on Kindle. I do recommend people read it because it's kind of a shocking, interesting to hear about people, public people we've heard about, people that you didn't expect to are into Aleister Crowley and generally into occultism and manifesting through using occult powers, whether that's witchcraft or positive thinking or other things, which is all part of the same milieu. But the whole idea is that it is an interesting book there, and I never knew these things. I'm assuming most of this is at least a ballpark true. Kinsey is certainly an interesting story if all of that is true. So this guy, but the reason he wrote all this stuff and studied sex is because he was very sexual. Well, that makes kind of sense, doesn't it? And it goes with so many of these things. People that are into something generally study it. The old cliche used to be, particularly in the 70s, is that, the reason why psychiatrists and psychologists went into that was because they're all crazy. Probably true. So the whole idea is that it is interesting. You just, you don't get this kind of information on too many places. So it's something that is good to read to find out who was into particularly this kind of ritual magic. And you got to remember, this isn't Satanism. This isn't some weird debased practice. These are books of a particular philosophy, a particular religion that have some magical overtones. There's nothing that I am aware, except for the occasional statements in Crowley's books that reference some sort of human or animal sacrifice, which is what I understand. This is not done by any of his followers, and a lot of this is put in for the scare factor, as well as being the wickedest man in the world. You can stand on the street corner and say, "I'm the purest, wonderfulest man in the world." "Ah, get out of here, mate. I'll beat you with a stick." Who's going to cover that? Not going to make front page news? The nicest man on the planet. How do you even judge that? But what'll sell papers is the wickedest man in the world, Mr. 666. And this was all kind of a lot of this was done pretty much as a little joke. It was sarcastic British humor on top of everything else. So, but it gets attention. This gets attention. Of course, that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to sell books. He wanted to get followers. And he was foolish in a lot of ways because he refused to charge anybody for any teachings he gave them. Part of his proper codes for such a bad guy. So he wouldn't charge anybody, which he could have made a lot of money that way and should have, but he didn't do that. So, as I said, he really hasn't achieved much. His books are there. People have followed them. They were picked up by all the hippy dippies in the 60s. He became a cult leader because he was preaching anti-society, anti-religion. The whole idea, is there much in there? Well, I'm going to have to go and revisit his stuff. I always found his stuff so boring, his Thelema books, the Book of Law, and all that stuff. It was so yawning, I never really got through them. I'm going to have to go through them again to find out what's so shocking here. Well, there really isn't. His practical magic books, I think there's one or two, is there two? Magic Without Tears. And this was a way of doing ritual magic, and it was a good, basic, practical magic book. And by the way, one of the few books of that type out there, because the Golden Dawn was a secret order, and they didn't publish anything. You had to be part of their membership. Crowley took the information, illegally published it, and basically his assistant took up after him and wrote books on it to this that is followed to this day. So, I mean, that's where it came from. The fact that his books are around, that he was known, that he was a wealthy Britisher, well, this all contributed to the fact that his literature was grabbed by the hippy-dippy crowd. And, of course, they were looking for somebody to say the church sucks. We have a new way. We believe in a new path. And it's not the path of being controlled and being told what to do every step of the way, but doing what you feel is right to make your life better. Do what you will. Now, as I said, this has been taken improperly, and only part of it has been stated there. So this is the kind of misinformation you get. Of course, this book is not going to tell you that either. But it is interesting to see everybody who was involved in this to a large degree, even going up to modern times. But the author does get a little ridiculous at the end here, reporting on psychotic murderers who claim they were Satanists who killed and ate people and buried them in their backyard, as somehow representing that he was motivated by Aleister Crowley. Really? And it's hard to get into that, and then trying to tie in people that really have nothing to do, like J.R. Rowling's, who has come out to not support occultism and said that she would not do that, and so many other things they mentioned that really were not connected to Aleister Crowley directly at all. So some of that is in there, and the fact just because somebody owns a book from somebody is another thing. So all of this is kind of gets to be a little ridiculous. Of course, there's a lot of mythology about Crowley, and apparently, you got to remember, there wasn't internet. He even talks about his meeting with Dylan Thomas, Jane Wolfe. It goes on and on with these different people of some note and some you've never heard of. And of course, if you're going to research or read about magic and occultism, well, whether for better or worse, Aleister Crowley is one of the instrumental figures in that area of research. It's pretty hard not to bump into it. Like being a Christian and saying, well, I never heard of Mormonism or the Baptists or anything else. I'm just a Protestant. Well, how can you not know of these other religions? And if you're not informed by them, it shows you really don't know your own religion. So it's just part of what's out there. And as I said, I had many of Crowley books, never really read them. But of course, if you're going to have a complete library, you have to have his stuff. And you can find a lot of his stuff online for free, people that are looking to read his actual statements and everything that goes with it. Another guy that has been demonized, as I mentioned, I went to a bookstore. I forget what book it was from Crowley's, but this bookstore salesman there in Riverside, California, had just bought one of his books there. And it was nothing special. It was some older edition, I think, from the 50s or something. And I looked at it and said, oh, I see you have this book. And he said, well, I'm not sure what's in there, but I've heard it's the most darkest, evilest thing you can get. Well, this is how it goes. This is how this stuff builds. And that's what this person, even a bookseller, which had no interest in occultism, probably never read an occult book, so he doesn't know whether this is good, bad, or indifferent, even if he did read it. But the bottom line is that that's your typical opinion. And people are prejudging everybody in this, anybody who's different. Well, we should prejudge all the Christians who have been murdering people in the Inquisitions and all over this planet and stringing up people in Salem and doing all the things that Christians do to persecute in their love God and being corrupt and supporting corrupt institutions, which they are known for, the police, the military, working for the criminal huge organization in Texas that trains all the criminals. So the whole idea is that take care of your own house first. And this is something I've always had a problem with. When you listen to any prejudiced or racist people, what they like to do, and the Christians like to attack everybody that they feel are not following what they should. And my answer to all that, and I remember doing that with different racist groups and people I talked to, I said, clean your own house. Your own people are horrible. They're doing terrible things against everybody that you consider good people. They're not helping anybody. They're corrupt, evil people. Point them out. Don't point out somebody else that you know nothing about. All these groups, whatever they are, want to point to the other people. Well, look in your own house because it's filthy, dirty, and stinking, and you need to hose it down, and you should start with your own house, your own room, your own closet, your own mouth. Stick a hose in there and clean it out. So the whole idea is those are all the things that go on. So you hear this all the time about these things. Kenneth Grant, And of course, we have a picture here of lamb. This is another thing that people have totally distorted. Now, the other problem with William Ramsey is he stated that extraterrestrials are demons. So you can see what kind of backwards thinking this guy is. So the whole idea, he doesn't consider them anything from other planets. Well, it can't be that. It gets back to Galileo. We're the center of the universe and God created the earth. This is what these people believe. And, earth was created 7,000 years ago, and that's why we still have dinosaurs were that young. So the whole idea is this is exactly the kind of thinking here. So again, can you trust anything here? So aliens or demons, this is an old thought form that's been out there for a while now, particularly coming from the Christians, that there certainly couldn't be extraterrestrials. What? Of course, this has been pretty much confirmed. And of course, these aren't spaceships. They're glowing balls of demons. So the whole idea is that these are the kind of things that happen. Now, whether there's entities or not, well, there certainly are entities out there, but generally they don't fly around in metal crafts that have crashed and we have their bodies and we have reverse engineered it. Now, this whole lamb entity that Aleister Crowley speaks about, and because it has a bulbous head with no hair, has been thought to be some sort of gray alien. But it doesn't look like a gray alien at all. The distinguishing feature of a gray alien is what? Well, if you look at a picture, what's the first thing you look at? Well, a lot of people have bulbous heads, particularly the fad now that everybody's shaving their head. So, there's a lot of people that kind of bulbous heads and big heads in general. A lot of actors are known because they have big heads. Like the late Alan Thicke. The guy had a huge head. I saw him in person. I couldn't believe it. So the whole idea is, but Lamb doesn't look like a gray alien at all. The one prominent feature is giant black eyes. He has the opposite. He has slit eyes. Extraterrestrials have been shown with slit eyes. So it doesn't make sense at all, but he's again jumping on that bandwagon because it fits his little cliche of that he was calling on a... And I don't know, you think it'd be better if it was a demon, because I don't know what... But of course he thinks aliens are demons, so he called on a demon. So they go into Hitler here. So it's a fun book, and as he said, I think I recommend. But remember, this guy is a radical, right-wing, born-again Christian. This is his ministry. I mean, when someone talks like that, you've got a very prejudiced opinion. So I don't know how good the information here is, but, it's fun reading about all these people, how successful they were, how they were using magic and conjuring up things, and they're super wealthy, super successful, getting $500,000 a year in funds in the 50s. So all of this is quite exciting to see that, well, something's going on here. Somebody didn't sit in a church and give money to some other guy so he could have his little harem of altar boys. So the whole idea is we have these problems. And of course, all the churches are dirty little sewers, and they certainly haven't achieved much. So we have to fully understand that. It's not just the Catholics. Jim Jones killed over 1,000 people that they poisoned or machine gunned, and we can go on and on. Jim and Tammy Baker stole millions. We go on and on for all these people that are involved in this area. So there's far from a clean slate here. David Koresh, who was having sex with very young girls, basically pedophilia. Most of them were under 13, or at least some of them were, and everybody else does. So he was having sex with everybody because he was the Lamb of God, and this is in that. So the whole idea is that he ultimately got a whole bunch of children killed. He got into a actual shooting match with the federal government, who brought in tanks. So the whole idea is that the Davidians, all of these people. So, I mean, we're supposed to overlook that. Well, you take some goofball Satanist who may have murdered a couple of people. Well, if we put all the things done by Aleister Crowley types and Satanists next to church crimes and what the Christian church has done in general, there's no comparison. It's got to be 1 or 2% of crimes are committed, while 98% are committed by Christians. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. So, but it is interesting for anyone interested in Aleister Crowley and how this book got around. I don't know why anybody was impressed with him. As I said, I read his stuff, and it was kind of a yawn, just like the Satanic Bible. I mean, so what? I mean, there was nothing in there that was very profound. There was some goofy stuff, but basically it was, a Machiavellian modern book. How to outmaneuver people, don't trust people, do the. I mean, really. I mean, this isn't very shocking in any details or even overly interesting. I mean, people work for their own interest all the time. The fact that the Church of Satan admitted it and said, well, work for yourself, take care of your own butt, and somebody gets in your way, smack them and smack them hard. Enjoy sex, enjoy drink, excess is good. Well, I mean, people do that all the time, don't they? The only thing that the Church of Satan is saying, which that particular Church of Satan from that particular time with Anton LaVey was a philosophical organization. They did not believe in a physical Satan, which is the reason why there was a schism there. And while the people who wanted to pray to some entity so they could feel more special didn't want to stay with the church, and that's what happened. That was the bottom line there. It had nothing to do with anything else, and everyone should know that. But this is the kind of nonsense that got. But what's so impressive about that? I mean, it's amazing that people would catch on to that, but there was the element that happened then. Remember your history and time frame. This was the 1960s. Everybody was taking drugs, selling drugs, having free sex, smoking pot. All of that was going on. And this was pushed and ignited by the fact that there was a war going on and they were bringing home thousands of bodies a week. And you could be next. So you had to be anti-government and maybe taking a little dope just to get together, and you might as well be doing a little sex because you could be drafted and murdered in a place and you'll never have anything. So this is very important. So this was the other thing behind it that we don't quite understand. That was also mixed with a lot of hallucinogens and everything else. And this woke up people in a bizarre way, which now has manifested in modern times to really just nothing but debauchery and stupidity. But it pushed people as the 80s after the 70s and what was going on there. A whole Reagan revolution came in where all these born-again Christian types pushed their will everywhere. So this was very common in most places except in very small areas of cities. There's this whole conversion over to this right-wing thinking, which was pretty much anybody in the suburbs, including Los Angeles, where I grew up. So the whole idea is this was the prominent movement. I never heard of Aleister Crowley until I got involved in esoteric studies. And of course, he's one of them. It's like saying, well, you were reading the Bible, but you've never heard of the Old Testament, or you never heard of the Quran, or you never heard of the Torah, or the different books of the Tibetans. Well, where are you? Of course you have when you get involved. So this is all stuff that's way overblown. The fact that successful people that have achieved lots of things, who've sold millions of records, and who are great actors and writers and everything else, read Aleister Crowley is more to me a recommendation than a condemning. Until next time.